Detectives are spying on a man eating a pizza on a busy street corner in downtown Manhattan. From our perspective, it might look weird to witness the police burning a hole into the back of this man's head, who looks like he's enjoying his lunch. But the police aren't eyeing the pizza. Well, they are, but not for the reason you think. The investigators want the man's snuff from the pizza crust, and finally, the man tosses the pizza out and heads back to work for the afternoon. Police jump up and grab the pizza from the trash. The man has no idea. But detectives are trying to pin him to a vicious crime. That's because this man just claimed the lives of 4 women, and he nearly got away with it. If it weren't for his love of pizza, the Gilgo 4. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week, often multiple times a week. So if you're interested in classic true crime, hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free and just lets you know when I post new cases. Between July 2007 and September 2010, 4 women mysteriously went missing in New York. As time went on and the disappearances were analyzed side by side, the investigators were certain that they were connected. The cases of these women were baffling, and no one knew where the women could be. And it was until 2010 when, tragically, their bodies were discovered in a remote beach town called Gilgo. When that happened, the strange and unsettling disproportionate homicides of the women were dubbed the Gilgo murders, and the unfortunate women involved were called the Gilgo 4. So, who were the Gilgo 4? Well, aside from them women who were adored and cared for by their families and loved ones, they all had some things in common. All of the women were in their 20s, had a petite build, and were also offering certain services. Craigslist at the time of their disappearance. The country was in a recession at the time, so I guess you gotta make money where you can. It's not like they enjoyed their jobs anyway. They were just doing their best to not end up living on the streets or eating out of a dumpster. Regardless, this realization that each of the women had so much in common ultimately led the detectives to think that murders were the doings of a serial killer. And well, they didn't know it back then, but they would be right. And what was even worse was that thievery serial killer had taken the lives off several women before. And even after the Gilgo 4, the reign of terror started all the way back in November 1993 and lasted till 2011. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, we need to start in 2007 when the first of the 4 victims went missing. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was an intellectual and artistic 25-year-old woman from Norwich, Connecticut, and was devoted to her family and friends. She was a mother of 2 children, one of whom was 7 at the time of her disappearance. Maureen worked as a seasonal mark, but she was eventually fired from her job and was on the verge of getting evicted. This caused her to turn to adult work to provide for her daughter. It's not a job any of us are likely to agree with. But Maureen was backed into a corner, and considering she had bills due immediately, she didn't know of any other way to make a lot of money. And make it fast. Maureen was last seen on July 7, 2007. When she planned to spend a day in New York, she had called a friend before her disappearance, telling her how she was supposed to meet a client outside the Super 8 motel in Manhattan, but she was never heard from again. Her family reported her missing. But there would be no leads or promising information for the time being, and the case eventually went cold. 2 years later, 24-year-old Melissa Bartholey went missing on July 12, 2009. She was originally from Erie County, New York, but at the time, she lived in a basement apartment in the Bronx. Melissa had left behind her mother and 15-year-old sister, who were very concerned when she failed to reach out to them for the next couple of days. Melissa's mom eventually reported her daughter missing on July 18th. According to a close friend of Melissa, she was due to meet a man and promised to be back in the morning, but she never returned. Less than a year later, another woman went missing, and she was 22-year-old Megan Waterman. Megan was from Scarborough, Maine, and she was a mother of a 3-year-old daughter named Lily. Megan was last seen on June 6, 2010, at around 1:30 a.m. on surveillance leaving a Holiday Inn Express in Long Island to meet a client, even though Megan was away from her daughter in Maine, who was living with Megan's mom, Lauren. She would call her daily and catch up, but that didn't happen after June 6th. She wasn't picking up her phone, and hearing complete silence from her daughter compelled Lauren to eventually report her missing on June 8th. The next and final disappearance of the Gilgo 4 was just months after. Megan went missing in September 2010. Even though no one knew at the time that killings were connected. That line is just terrifying. You can tell that the serial killer is targeting victims one after another, and the cooldown period, or the time in between each attack, is getting shorter and shorter. This time, a woman named Amber Lynn Costello, from West Babylon, New York, went missing. She was an excellent student raised in South Carolina, but for some reason, she fell into a life of addiction and never really came out. She even worked as a waitress at one point, but she eventually turned to adult work to pay the bills. It was reported that Amber was approached by a potential client who was going to pay her $2,500 for her services, which was way more than her usual rate. She didn't really know what the guy wanted to do in exchange for so much money, but for Amber, this lump sum could have been her to get out of this lifestyle once and for all. Just one more night, one more job. And it would all be over. The thing is, Amber was right. It would all be over soon. Just now how she had hoped. Police find Bodie's Amber's friend, David Schaller, remembered Amber telling them that this high-paying client had a green Chevrolet Avalanche and was a huge guy, about 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he wore very large, oval-shaped glasses. In short, David said that the client looked like an ogre. But that's all the information he knew about him, and before anyone knew it, Amber was missing. These disappearances were very confusing for the police, but soon, they would find answers, or rather, the victims themselves, and this would leave everyone terrified. So, the location where these 4 women had disappeared was a mystery for a long time, until May 1, 2010, when another woman in distress called the police. Tragically, she wouldn't survive either, but her disappearance set off a chain of events that eventually led the investigators to Gilgo Beach. The concerned woman was 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, another adult worker, who called 911 on May 1 at around 4:50 a.m. She was going to a house in Oak Beach on Jones Beach Island in Suffolk County when the call was made. On the call, she sounded hysterical and scared, and you could hear her panting as if she was running from someone. On the call, Shannon told the operator that they were trying to kill her. Tragically, the call was disconnected, but not before Shannon screamed at the top of her lungs for help. Her disappearance was also left unanswered until June when the Suffolk County Police Department's Missing Persons Bureau assigned Officer John Malia to search the area where Shannon was last seen and find some clues. Officer Malia, along with the cadaver dog, Blue, searched for months before they finally hit a jackpot on December 11, 2010. Officer Malia searched the vast area close to the beach, and even though it was covered in snow and the path was impossible to walk on, thanks to the vegetation, the cadaver dog, Blue, alerted the officer of a scent coming from underneath the snow. When the area was further searched, a burlap sack was discovered. When officers opened the sack, well, as usual, they thought it may have been a mannequin. But as we all know, it's never a mannequin. A bound body was found inside the bag. At the time, no one knew who it was, but little did they know. They were close to unraveling the truth of what happened to the Gilgo 4. The first set of remains was positively identified as those of Melissa Bartholomew. Further searches revealed more human remains, and by the end of the search, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello's remains were all found about 500 feet apart from each other, and disturbingly, all the women were bound by leather belts and wrapped in a unique hunting sack made of burlap. In March 2011, the investigators were in for more surprises, though. -1 Gilgo Beach hid more than just the remains of the Gilgo 4. In April 2011, more human remains were found along Ocean Parkway that would later be identified as Jessica Taylor, a woman who went missing in July 2003. Then, the remains of Tatiana Dykes and Valerie Mack would also be found. Remains of 2 more women, identified as Tanya Jackson and Karen Vergata, were found in the same area too. 100 feet apart from the rest of the women, Tanya's and Tatiana's DNA actually matched, and the detectives figured out that Tanya was Tatiana's mom, which is an entirely different, much darker layer to this story. Karen was yet again another adult worker, and she went missing back in 1996. Also, another unidentified body was found near Gilgo Beach. Interestingly, DNA results showed that the person was an Asian male but was wearing female clothing. The body was ultimately named Asian Doe, and the person lost their life by blunt force trauma. But, remember the name Shannon Gilbert, the one who called 911 that night, screaming? Well, her body was also found 19 months following her disappearance, in a marsh between Oak Beach and Ocean Parkway. But there was one problem. Her cause of death was debatable. It was concluded that Shannon had lost her life by tripping into the marsh and drowning. But in 2016, the autopsy revealed that Shannon's death was intentional. The thing is, Shannon's mom, Mari Gilbert, who has since passed away, had previously expressed her anger with the investigators and stressed that her daughter could have been drowned by the serial killer, for all anyone knew. She never knew how right she truly was. Despite this, Shannon's cause of death was officially reported as undetermined. So, Gilgo Beach became a haunting graveyard and a place of terror for the people of Suffolk County. Sure, it was a secluded beach, and no one nearly came down here. But the fact that it was the place where so many people were found deceased sent chills down everyone's spines. So, the police as well as the FBI joined forces and aimed to bring this crime spree to an end. When a task force was made, they decided to look into phone records, and for simplicity, the investigators did to focus on the Gilgo for now. Well, when they came across phone calls made to victims, they found some disturbing details. An unknown number, traced to Madison Square Garden, called the Gilgo 4's family members, and these calls came right after the 4 women went missing. This couldn't have been a simple coincidence, and police were now ready to make their first move. DNA cracks the cadety calls the families received from the sunk-down phone number were highly disturbing, and the caller, a man, would make very derogatory remarks about the victims and their professions. But what was so chilling was that the mysterious caller would further taunt the victims, familiars, and tell them that the women were no longer alive because they had killed them. Following this revelation, the investigators also decided to run DNA tests on any evidence found in the bodies of the Gilgo 4 victims, and that was when they got very promising information. See, several women found on Gilgo Beach, specifically Megan Waterman, had strands of hair on their bodies. They weren't long, and from the looks of it, they looked like a man's hair. So, the detectives decided to test the hair's DNA. The results didn't match anyone in the system, but this very DNA would soon lead to a person of interest, or rather, a suspect. Another cold case of a woman named Sandra Castillo, who went missing in 1993, took place in the area, and her remains were found in a wooded area in North Sea, Long Island, approximately 60 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach. In November 1993, surprisingly, there were hair strands on her body as well, and when those were tested, the results came out as a match to strands found on Megan's body. So now, the crimes were connected, and the investigators had rock-solid evidence. The Gilgo 4, Sandra, and possibly all of the other victims were murdered by the same person. What is so heartbreaking is that Megan was forced into adult work by her boyfriend-turned-manager, Akeem. To make matters worse, Akeem was also physically abusive towards Megan and forced her to pick up work in New York because she would get paid more. Akeem was eventually arrested on unrelated drug charges later on. Megan left her child with her mom, Lauren, in hopes of making a better living in New York. But who knew that moving to New York would be the ticket to her untimely end? Megan just wanted to give her daughter a better life, just like all the other victims. And it is just heartbreaking that Megan ended up choosing this line of work, and in the end, crossing paths with a serial killer. As tragic as Megan's story was, the presence of the murderer's DNA on her body eventually led the police to connect some major breadcrumbs to follow. The investigators looked into the information of the murderer driving a dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche and his big and burly appearance. Eventually, this information was another breakthrough in this complex case, and it led the detective straight to Midtown Manhattan, where a successful architect will be on investigators' radar. A serial killer is caught based on phone records and witnesses. The investigators tracked down a successful artist named Rex Hoyerman, and he was soon named as a suspect in the murders of the Gilgo 4 as well as other missing women whose remains were found at Gilgo Beach. Rex lived in Massapequa Park, on the south shore of Long Island, for most of his life, and Hugh worked in Midtown Manhattan at his architectural RH Consultants and Associates since 1987. Turns out, the calls made to the victims' families were traced to these very places. To everyone's suspicion and intrigue, Rex also drove a dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, which was conveniently in South Carolina at the time the police got to him. He was over 6 feet tall, had a burly appearance, and wore large oval-shaped glasses. I mean, what are the odds, right? But from the looks of it, Rex looked like a family man. He lived in his humble abode with his wife, Asa, and 2 children. one of whom was his daughter from her previous relationship. He looked like an ordinary man in his 50s building a successful architectural empire, but looks can be deceiving, and Rex here had mastered the art of masking his real, terrifying face behind his bookish and smart appearance. Growing up, Rex had bad luck with girls, and he was constantly rejected, but again, he never lashed out or got into fights with students, even though he was built like a giant. Rex did have one thing going for him though. He was very smart, which led him to becoming a successful businessman in the 1980s. Rex was also fond of hunting. Now, nothing is alarming here. I'm sure a lot of people love the sport, but to the police, this information perked their ears up. See, the missing women were found bound with leather belts, and their bodies were wrapped in a specific type of burlap sack that hunters normally use. To add to this, there was DNA evidence, which was the golden ticket for the police. But they needed to get their hands on Rex's DNA. So, the investigators decided to follow Rex in Manhattan, and one fateful day, Rex was eating a pizza, and he threw the box in the trash near his worklist. The detectives pounced on this pizza box and sent it for DNA testing. Well, Rex's DNA matched the hair DNA on Megan's and Sandra's bodies. Rex was their guy. More charges, more bodies for investigation led to some very interesting information to surface. Rex's employees at RH Consultants and Associates had an inkling that Rex was kind of weird. He was very fond of hunting, weak, defenseless spree, and he was borderline stalkerish. One employee of Rex's reported that Rex had found out that she was on vacation on a cruise, and Rex thought that it was a bright idea to slip a note under the door of her cabin that read, "You know I can find you anywhere." Now, I don't know about you, but that would be enough reason for me to leave the job immediately, no matter how well they paid. Anyway, this left the female employee very unsettled. But that was that. Well, later on, the investigators were able to find the exact Chevrolet Avalanche in Chester, South Carolina, where Rex also had property. So, it seemed as though the police were at the finish line, and all they had to do was arrest Rex before he got away. On July 13, 2023, Rex Hoyerman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in relation to Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello's murders. He was also eventually named a prime suspect in the disappearance of Maureen Brainerd Barnes and subsequent murder, for which he was charged in January 2024, after more incriminating evidence came out. But fast forward to June 6, 2024. Rex was arraigned and charged with the murders of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costello. Then, in December 2024, he was also indicted for the murder of Valerie Mack. It is believed that Rex used Craigslist to find his victims, and had a specific type that he would target, although we don't know why Rex only targeted petite young women who were also adult workers. It is unsettling nonetheless. It took the investigators more than a decade to find human remains at Gilgo Beach in 2010 and 2011. And then finally link all of these unsolved and terrifying murders to Rex, which ultimately led to his arrest in 2023. But there's another plot twist. See, when the detectives were gathering the evidence from the remains, they found strands of longer hair on some of the victims too, specifically on the leather belts. Those long hair strands positively matched with Rex's wife, Asa. So, the police were also suspicious of Rex's wife in the beginning. Was she an accomplice of the murders? Was she in on the murders? Did the couple work together to lure victims and then take their lives? But this theory soon hit a wall when the investigators went ahead, talked to Asa, and saw for themselves how clueless and alarmed she was at her husband's secret double life. It was at that moment when the investigators thought that Asa's DNA was probably there via contact. Rex probably transferred Asa's as well as her daughter Victoria's DNA from himself onto the victims. And yes, you heard that right. Even Victoria's DNA was found on the leather belts, which was bizarre, but she was just a child back when the murders occurred. There is no way that Victoria, or Asa for that matter, had a hand in the killings. Moreover, Asa and the rest of Rex's family were on vacation out of state when most of the murders occurred, so it seemed like Rex acted all alone. It could be as simple as domestic transfer, or it could also be something darker. What if Rex had deliberately put his wife's and daughter's DNA on the victims to throw the investigators off and make them suspect Asa? Now, this is just an accusation, there's no evidence to really suggest this. But it's an interesting thought nonetheless. The detectives also managed to recover mirror selfies of Rex that he used on Craigslist to target the services of adult workers. The investigators believed that he would go to Craigslist, find the victims that fit his criteria, and then lure them to shady hotels, motels, and even houses where he would end their lives with his bare hands or with a heavy object while the victims were bound. He would then wrap the bodies in burlap and toss them near Gilgo Beach, thinking that no one would suspect them to be here for a long time. It is so frightening that Rex was out there, targeting young, defenseless women like prey since the 90s, and he got away with it for so long. What's next? As of December 2024, at the end of this long investigation by the Suffolk County Police Department and the FBI, Rex has been charged with murders of 7 women: Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthélemy, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Sandra Costilla, Jessica Taylor, and Valerie Mack. Rex was dubbed the Long Island serial killer in the media following his arrest. Rex is awaiting trial in Riverhead Correctional Facility in Suffolk County. He has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges, and his defense attorney stated that Rex didn't commit any of the crimes. Rex's attorney recently requested 7 charges to be split into 5 trials, but this was denied by a Suffolk County courthouse judge. Rex's attorney also wants the judge to block the DNA evidence, which is crucial for linking Rex to the crime, because the testing methods were not used before in a New York courtroom. Even though the trial date hasn't been announced yet, it is possible that it can take place anytime during this year. Rex Horman is a calculated and pompous serial killer who didn't only target women but also had the audacity to taunt the victims' families. Megan's remains were the reason for the breakthrough in this case because it not only led to substantial evidence but also linked the perpetrator to a cold case back in 1993, hence leading it to the road of completion. Even though all of the women Rex had targeted weren't working ideal jobs, it doesn't mean that they weren't any less human than any other person on the planet. They had families, they had children, and they had friends. Yes, life had beaten them down, but they were still loved and cared for by their close friends and family. Megan's mom, Lauren, battled substance abuse, but she got clean, and she took care of her granddaughter, Lily, who is now an esthetician in her own company. Lay back with Lily. Lauren unfortunately passed away in 2022, battling cancer, and she tragically couldn't get the satisfaction of seeing her daughter's killer get caught. Amber, Melissa, Maureen, Megan, Sandra, Jessica, Valerie, Karen, Tanya, Tatiana, and Shannon were all loving and caring women, and their families miss them tremendously. Some family members have passed away in search of answers, while some are still out there, hoping that the perpetrator gets the punishment he deserves for attacking and taking the lives of these women. But these are just the women who are on record of being Rex's victims. We don't know how many more women or people Rex has targeted in reality, so we can only hope that he gets the highest possible sentence and punishment, because none of the women deserved what happened to them. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including William Sladden and Amber. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's a great way to support the channel and help out. I really appreciate those of you who've decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link in the description. Don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also available, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It is totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I will catch you guys in the next one.